Hi, you have Mark, Matt, and Ted here, and we're going to give a brief summary of what an intentional interim pastor, and we might say IIP, that signifies intentional interim pastor. I'm going to give a brief introduction. Matt's going to talk about some of the job duties, and then Ted's going to finish us off. We did wanted to have a meeting with the voters, but because of COVID and everything, and we've said to the congregation, only come if you feel comfortable coming to church. So I canceled that meeting, the voters meeting with that. So if you have questions or concerns at any time, you can contact one of the three of us at any time if you have concerns or questions about the intentional interim pastor. So interim refers to a time in between. It is a time between what has been and what will be in a congregation. It is a time, for us, it's going to be, we've had pastor for 17 and a half years, and we have talked with the intentional interim pastor coordinator, and his name's Pastor Casper. Matt, Ted, and Malia and myself met with Pastor Casper here about a little over a month ago, and he brings in, he has a group of pastors in Michigan that are intentional interim pastors. They have been pastors their whole life, and they are mostly, almost all of them I think, are retired, and they have taken extra classes to become an intentional interim pastor. And it is to help congregations like ours, because one of the criteria for having an intentional interim pastor is if you've had a pastor for more than 10 years, you should be looking at having an intentional interim pastor. And with Pastor Jim being here for 17 and a half years, we qualify. Also, rather than just maintaining itself and urgently seeking a new pastor, this in-between time provides an opportunity for renewal, congregational development, and spiritual growth. An intentional interim pastor provides word and sacrament, pastoral ministry, and brings additional skills and training to assist the congregation during its in-between time of having a resident pastor and when we would go and call a pastor. The intentional interim pastor would be for 1 year, and as far as some people wondering how much it would cost, it would be less than what we are currently paying pastor as far as a whole, I guess what you would say, a whole package that we are currently paying pastor, because this pastor would be retired, he may not need insurance. So these are all things that the three of us will sit down, probably with Malia also, when we come up with an intentional interim pastor and we work out a contract for that 1 year. Also, after congregational self-discovery and renewal, the congregation hopefully is ready to seek to call and challenge a pastor whose skills will assist the congregation with its renewed mission. The interim pastor is trained to intentionally work on these important functions with the congregation. He is not a vacancy pastor, as we use that term, as we had in the past, where we have a vacancy pastor for whatever length of time. And as I said, most interim lasts for 12 months. We actually set up a contract, but that agreement can be terminated with a 30-day notice. So I'm going to let Matt go ahead with a little bit more of what the function of the intentional interim pastor entails.
Now, the real point of an intentional interim pastor is in the transition. They're not here to just be a warm body in space. They aren't the vacancy. They're not a substitute. The intentional interim pastor won't be, for example, Pastor Massey. He hasn't been trained for that kind of thing. It's a trained position. And so having the intentional interim pastor then gives us, the membership, time to evaluate what our ministry and mission in our community is. And it sets a direction for our future and clarifies the expectations for the ministry for the next permanent pastor, who hopefully will be around for a while. It also increases the likelihood that that pastorate will be more effective and reinforces the ministry that we, the lay workers, then the members of the congregation and the leadership of the congregation then do. Then it also helps, because of his training, it helps us to recognize areas of that we need to grow in, areas that we need to modify our thought, because a lot of times that there's a lot of things that we have learned to get around with our current pastor, with Pastor Jim. And so he helps us to work on those areas that we've been essentially laying a trap for the new pastor, even though we don't think of it that way. It really is, because this is the way we've always done it. Well, a new pastor doesn't necessarily do it that way, and it helps us to recognize where those areas are. And it'll allow the new pastor then to devote his energies to the present instead of dealing with our past, because we'll have been able to deal with our past then. Then it also promotes the healing in the congregation for the damage that has been done for different situations. For example, the whole COVID thing that we're facing right now. Hopefully, the interim pastor's training can help us deal with the difficulties we've had to face with that. So here I'm going to pass it over to Ted, and he's going to talk about everything else.
Well, thank you, Mark and Matt. You've done a really nice job of outlining the intentional interim pastor. I think the word intentional is important to consider, because we are making this vacancy an intentional time to look at ourselves as much as a new pastor coming in. I think it's been on our mind about having our church grow, and Pastor has talked significantly in our sermons about things that we should be, he's planted some seeds for us to consider as a congregation and how to respond to our community. Children and adults, as a society, we're changing. We need to reach out and minister to people in new ways and think about how we're doing that. By giving ourselves this time in a vacancy, we're going to have to put some on our own shoulders. And I think that the intentional interim pastor, one of his jobs in our meeting is to find out, to get us ready to take on more responsibilities ourselves, to become more active as members of our own church. And when we do that, we become more excited about God's mission for us. And we can consider ways that we can evangelize to people and grow our congregation. It's going to set a good signal to the new pastor if we've laid in some work. We've done some work in getting the ground ready, getting it fertile for having a new pastor come. And I think that is a real advantage of having this intentional interim pastor. The nice thing about it is that it's different than a vacancy pastor, is because we won't feel like we're wandering kind of without a pastor. If we just have a supply preacher, there's a possibility we'll end up with several individuals. Each of those might have a different path for our congregation. And we're not sure where that'll all end up. If we have this intentional interim pastor, he's going to provide us some direction. He's going to give us some guidance. But again, the focus is going to be on ourselves, on what we're going to need. But the reassuring thing is that we're going to have pretty much a full-time pastor on the ground, committed for a year. And that's going to give us time. It's going to give us time to figure out what we want. For instance, if we want a candidate from the seminary, we have to start the calling process for the candidate like next month. And I don't think we're ready for that. And if we want a pastor with experience or a pastor with who's a little older in a family, we're also going to kind of have to identify what we want and what we need. So we're going to get a professional person, we're going to get a dedicated person, and we're going to be given time, and we're going to be given opportunities to hopefully, grow ourselves as people and as a congregation. So hopefully that's my summary.
Great. Thank you, Matt and Ted. And like I said, if any of you have questions, please feel free to get a hold of any one of us. We'd be happy to meet with you at church, in the basement or wherever. We'll keep you up to date on where we're going and what's happening. So God's blessings and thank you.